Camera, action!
Et d'abord, quelques faits, puisque la vérité est parmi eux.
He was the son of a Swiss businessman who went to Paris disgusted with the kind of bourgeois constrained life of Rolle and, you know, the outskirts of Geneva, and went and joined the cine clubs and soon met the key individuals who were going to make the French Cinémathèque into the most important institution in France at that moment.
On allait souvent au cinéma. L'écran s'éclairait et on frémissait.
He obsessively watches the right kind of American movies, maybe noirs and cheap westerns and so on, and writes about them very brilliantly in Cahiers du Cinéma, which is a new publication in Paris.
On était triste. Ce n'était pas le film dont nous avions rêvé. Ce n'était pas ce film total que chacun parmi nous portait en soi. Ce film qu'on aurait voulu faire. Ou, plus secrètement sans doute, que nous aurions voulu vivre.
My name is Jean-Michel Frodon and I am editor-in-chief of Cahiers du Cinéma. Godard used to say that he and the other guy from Cahiers became critics making films with a pen because they couldn't make film with a camera during the 50s. André Bazin created in 1951 Cahiers du Cinéma. There are many levels of influence from Bazin theories on Godard. Directing is an ethical issue. The way you use a camera, the way you use a frame, the way you use the relation between sound and image, the way you use editing is an ethical issue and not a technical or not even an aesthetical issue to start with.
Pourquoi vous me regardez? Je ne suis pas un étrange animal, je suis un être humain.
Cinema is based on recording reality, and that there is no separation between fiction and documentary because whatever it is based on recording the real world with the camera and with the mic.
The only point about cinema is do you believe it? There's no other point in cinema.
La photographie, c'est la vérité. Et le cinéma, c'est 24 fois la vérité par seconde.
When I watch all my BAFTA tapes, I watch one film after another, they're all beautifully crafted. I can use other adjectives, but the point is I don't believe a word of any of it. So that is a disadvantage in cinema. So every time a youthful movement comes into cinema, they have to say, well, actually, by the way, I don't believe this. And Bazin telling them when all the film studios in Rome were destroyed, Rossellini had to make a new cinema out of the reality of the streets, and a complete unwillingness to compromise. That's the same impulse which Godard represents inside the New Wave. He is the first European filmmaker who is relaxed about the idea that ordinary Europeans have the identities of American film stars running through their minds as they walk down the street, and therefore he can make films about Europe which are more real than those people who ignore the fact that we're attached to American culture.
Whenever I hear the word culture, I bring out my checkbook. Come here.
The American cinema was much more lively and much more direct and much more cinematic than the old French cinema, which was always seemed to be, to him, to be based on either the theatre or literature. We never thought, until the French went on and on about them, that the old hacks of Hollywood were actually sort of auteurs, capable of making much more just factory films. Truffaut adored Hitchcock. For Godard, it was people like Fritz Lang, Sam Fuller.
The other seat, 701, take 3.
In a way, Godard is a chameleon. You never know what he's going to do next. He was capable of making films in all sorts of different styles and mixing those styles up. Breathless is a typical example. You know, doing something completely fresh, but based on other things that he'd seen.
He goes to see Touch of Evil, and then he immediately thinks, okay, I'm going to make an urban crime thriller myself, and he gets various people together, including Truffaut and others who help him to get a little bit of money together, and he makes A Bout de Souffle.
Un film de Jean-Luc Godard, avec Jean Seberg et Jean-Paul Belmondo.
Which has then got an actress discovered by Preminger, who he loves from the American cinema, Belmondo, who is kind of doing something about his own love of Bogart.
Si vous n'aimez pas la mer, si vous n'aimez pas la montagne, Si vous n'aimez pas la ville, allez vous faire foutre.
It was very exciting seeing Breathless. Not being a macho sort of a person, although I wouldn't have minded giving Jean Seberg one, I never walked around doing that, smoking gitans, thinking I was Belmondo. I mean, I did come out of many a Lawton film thinking I was Charles Lawton, but that's not the same thing, you know.
La jolie fille, le vilain garçon, le revolver, la mort, les anarchistes, le diable au corps, du rififi chez les hommes, et Dieu créa la femme, Scarface, à bout de souffle.
Le meilleur film actuel.
New York Herald Tribune!
There's that incredible sense of the reality of those people and their everyday lives. And in the midst of that, a highly coded and romanticized sense of the way in which human relations are conducted in cinema.
Je te le rends, il n'y a pas d'horoscope.
Qu'est-ce que c'est l'horoscope?
L'horoscope, c'est l'avenir. J'ai envie de savoir l'avenir, pas toi?
Moi aussi.
And a very adolescent sense, let's be honest, of the way in which, you know, beautiful women will betray you, so you might as well shoot yourself anyway before it all happens. And all kinds of things which are kind of cheesy in a way in that film, but in their own context are quite wonderful.
Qu'est-ce que c'est dégueulasse?
The word is that it was simply way over length. And the only way that Godard could think of to tackle the problem without losing the substance of the film was to invent the jump cuts and thus condense it.
Je trouve que les Parisiennes ont des robes trop courtes. Ça fait poule.
Allez, je t'en prie. On a envie de courir derrière et de leur faire comme ça.
Ne te gêne surtout pas.
Stoppez là!
The way the film was shot and the speed at which it was shot, it's a bit like Night of the Living Dead. It defines the film. You can't have the film without that lack of resources and without that sense of speed.
The whole notion that you could get out there on the street and capture the street and capture it spontaneously so it wouldn't look like something in a movie was, you know, certainly what redefined what a movie was.
His women were sort of icons of their day, there's no question of that. Everybody wanted to be in a Godard film at one period. Now everybody would run a mile.
Elle, c'est Marina Vladi. Elle est actrice.
He shot them marvelously. He dealt with them pretty roughly, I believe, on the set, but he got marvelous performances from them. He used Anna Karina because she was not only because he loved her at the time, but because she was a great actress.
Hasta luego.
À tout de suite.
I guess he saw me in one of the publicities at that time, showing before the film began.
Mon savant bouquet. Il n'est pas comme les autres.
So I was asked to go and see him, which I did, and he said, well, it's for a little part. In my first film, it's called Breathless, à bout de souffle. You're playing the girl, she's taking her clothes off. So I said, oh no, I don't take my clothes off. They said, well, I've seen you in the bathtub and all that. I said, yes, but in the bathtub you only see a little shoulder and a little leg like this. And I was saying, you know, I was not nude in the picture. And so I left. Some months later, I got another telegram. Would you please come and meet Mr. Jean-Luc Godara? This time it might be for the first part. So we did The Little Soldier, political film, and we went to shoot it in Switzerland.
You can see very well at the beginning of the film how much filming the face of the woman he loves is giving him strength, is giving him energy. There is no storytelling in the regular sense, but there is a lot of emotion.
Et depuis que vous êtes à Genève, beaucoup de garçons vous font la cour?
Oui. Pourquoi?
Non, pour savoir.
One Sunday, we were all invited to Lausanne. We were sitting there at this table, you know, having dinner. And Jean-Luc was sitting in front of me like you're sitting right now. And suddenly I feel that somebody wants to give me something under the table. I knew that my boyfriend got the hunch, you know, about something was going on with this piece of paper. So Jean-Luc, he left right away, you know. So I still got this piece of paper in my hand. So I went to the room, you know, and I read the paper. And on the paper was written, I love you, rendezvous at midnight in Café de la Paix in Geneva. My boyfriend takes the paper and reads it too and said, I suppose you're not going, he says. And I said, yes, I am. Because I was in love too, but nobody wanted to, you know, this has been going on for 3 months. I mean, you know, looks and all that. And I went by foot over the bridge to the old town and to the Café de la Paix. And Jean-Luc was sitting with a newspaper like this. And so I come into the cafe and I go straight to him. And it seemed to me like hours before he looked at me. And then he said, oh, here you are, let's go. And that's how we met. For real, I mean.
They lived together, they got married, and they would separate by the end of the 60s. So the few films they made together, there was this kind of vibration, which happens when there is this relation between a director and somebody he loves.
À quoi vous pensez?
Rien. Je pense que s'il existe.
Elle s'en va.
Of course, I loved the first time I saw Jean-Paul Belmondo and Jean-Claude Brialy on the set. A woman is a woman. My knees was going like this because I was so nervous.
Bon, voilà. Es-tu d'accord de faire un enfant à mademoiselle que voilà? Est-ce que c'est une tragédie ou une comédie? Avec les femmes, on sait jamais.
It was too much, you know. It's like being with two great actors like this. But they were so sweet and so funny.
Pourquoi tu rigoles?
Parce que, Angela, tu es infâme.
Moi? Je ne suis pas infâme. Je suis une femme.
Well, Vive sa vie, from the point of view of understanding what choices you can make without showing everything, making definite aesthetic choices in independent film. Vive sa vie is just a kind of a touchstone film, I think, for every independent filmmaker, and they have to see it.
I think it's a very touching character because it's a matter of fact that when the film came out, there was a prostitute who came to me and said, I just saw the film, that's the best film I ever seen about a girl becoming a prostitute. I think it's a very beautiful film, by the way, and it really, really explains how it all happens. He liked very much the film Jeanne d'Arc de Dreyer. He always took me to the Cinematheque, so I've seen the film. And I remember Falconetti when she was crying. When I'm crying in the movie house, you can understand that there was nothing on the screen. So I said to myself, well, I will think about this image. It was all fun to make, like, you know, when you're dancing in the Madison in Bonaparte, The Outsiders. They always say, Jean-Luc, he doesn't rehearse, we don't have time to do so and so. It's not true, we rehearsed that scene for 3 weeks in a nightclub, every night. Because Sami Frey and Claude Brassard didn't know how to dance. Jean-Luc is a very strange character. We all know that. He would go away, you know, like he would say, I'm going to buy some cigarettes. and then he would not come back for 3 weeks.
Qu'est-ce que je peux faire? Je sais pas quoi faire!
Non, j'écris!
He went to Italy to see Rossellini, or if he went to Sweden to see Bergman. I guess I was too young to understand that, to be abandoned like that all the time. But the most I saw him was in the movie sets.
C'est notre histoire. Un peintre qui fait le portrait de sa femme. Tu veux que je continue?
Oui. Sometimes, of course, when I was sad, I would hide away and cry a lot, but I wouldn't show it. We understood each other in the artistic way, I guess, yes. Much more than in the human way, I guess. Is that pretentious to say that, maybe? I don't know.
That's what I think of that stuff up there, Fritz. You cheated me, Fritz. That's not what is in that script.
He never wrote the script, you know. He would write the dialogues in the morning, and sometimes we had the dialogues 20 minutes before we would start to rehearse. We were really allowed to rehearse a lot. You never know which Jean-Luc he wants to do. You just have to follow, you know, and to understand.
Vous avez du feu.
Oui, j'ai fait 9000 kilomètres pour vous en donner.
I remember when he did Alphaville, he would go to London to check out the new pellicule. He would stay there for a few months, really to study about it, to know about it.
Il n'y a jamais quelqu'un qui tombe amoureux de vous.
Amoureux? Qu'est-ce que c'est?
With this very sensitive film, you can see everything. It's very, I think it's very beautiful in a way.
Le regard, la parole, et le fait que je t'aime.
Alphaville defines low-budget genre films for a generation afterwards. He's not afraid to make an urban science fiction film, which is about what's said on the soundtrack and the way he manipulates, you know, small spaces and buildings and low lighting and all of that. So in a way, there's a huge inventiveness about it.
And the young people love Pure le Fou. It's an old film, of course, but it's not to those, because the spirit is very young.
Pourquoi t'as l'air triste?
Parce que tu me parles avec tes mots, que moi je te regarde avec tes sentiments.
Vous voyez, elle pense qu'à rigoler.
À qui tu parles?
Spectateur.
I worked a lot with Jean-Luc, who gave me really great parts. It was like gifts, because they were so different all the time.
Tu me quitteras jamais?
Mais non, bien sûr.
Bien sûr.
Oui, bien sûr.
We did 7.5 pictures together, and it was really like presents. Really like presents.
On se voyait presque plus. Je ne sais pas si je l'aime encore après tout. Mais j'avais dû te voir envers lui à cause de cet amour.
Between Jean-Luc and me, it was a big love story. And that nobody can take away from me, you know. I don't know how he feels about it today. But it's something that nobody can take away from me, never.
Allez, du passage. Il y a 2 minutes, je voyais la mort partout, maintenant c'est le contraire. Regarde. La mer, les vagues, le ciel. Ah, la vie est peut-être triste, mais elle est toujours belle.
If you want to talk to students about creating a relationship with between sound and image, which is genuinely dynamic, and then actually impacts on the meaning of the work, then you can't do that without Godard. There's no other way to begin. I think the other thing is also the need to innovate. There aren't many filmmakers who are adopting an attitude to the world in terms of the number of times they need to be born that Miles Davis adopted or that Picasso adopted. And I think that makes him an incredibly precious individual from the point of view of his willingness to be very unpopular while he's inventing himself.
D'ailleurs, j'ai remarqué ça au cinéma. On fait presque toujours exactement le contraire de ce que l'on avait d'abord prévu. Et puis, finalement, ça ressemble quand même à ce qu'on avait imaginé au départ.
Qu'est-ce que c'est pour vous le centre du monde?
Le centre du monde?
Oui.
C'est drôle, je veux dire, on s'est jamais parlé. La première fois qu'on se parle, vous me posez des questions étonnantes.
Mon Dieu, pourquoi m'avez-vous abandonné?
Parce que je n'existe pas.
Ici, Radio Pékin.
Ici, Radio Pékin.
I think Godard's Maoism, I mean the Godard period, and the Chinoise and so on, in retrospect, does damage to the value of some of the things in the rest of the work. It's like the end of Weekend. I love the beginning of Weekend. The end of Weekend where they're all hanging around in the mud and all talking about Marx, Engels and Lenin as fast as they can, and Johnny Guitar in the same sentence. In a way, just has this adolescent thing like, isn't Mao Zedong cool?
Vous préférez être baisé par Mao ou par Johnson?
Par Johnson, évidemment.
Allez, Jean, t'as fasciste.
I think there is a sense that he is a libertarian artist, and he does liberate real ideas about real people. So I think he's an authentic radical.
Aujourd'hui où les révolutions sont impossibles, où des guerres sanglantes me menacent, où le capitalisme n'est plus très sûr de ses droits et la classe ouvrière en recul. Mais si par hasard les choses redeviennent nettes, ce ne peut être qu'avec l'apparition de la conscience. Ensuite, tout s'enchaîne.
After that, he became more and more and more in his own small corner, making his films for himself and hoping that they would get some kind of distribution. But it's a sad thing that even in France, nobody goes to see Godard now. But he remained an incredibly good filmmaker, even if he was getting more radical and more experimental by the minute, and not at all interested in even American narrative now.
What Godard gave to the cinema world is certainly an incredible amount of tools to think about the process of cinema making.
A great filmmaker now, I realize, because not only does he make his films with tremendous fluency and tremendous assurance, even if you don't understand a word of them, as a lot of people don't now, but somehow he's traversed everything in the cinema and made it fresh. That's what you can say about Godard. The auteur theory has been sort of rather attacked now as being absurd, and that in fact there are many other people who contribute to the personality of a film. You can't actually say that of a Godard film. You have to say that his personality is there in every frame.
Although Godard was, and indeed remains, as mad as a March hare, and some of what he eventually did was impenetrable to a point of obscurity, or do I mean obscure to a point of impenetrability. Nevertheless, there were some amazing things that came out of his head and his work, which I think are much to be celebrated. Godard is a major influence on all of us. He's there, but it would be wrong to allow Godard to be the single great saint of creative film. And the great thing is that the technology is there for anybody to take those tools and get out there into the street and be very extraordinary with them.